The following is a message from Christ Central Manchester, a church that meets in the heart of Manchester in the UK. To find out more about us, please visit www.christcentral.org.uk.
Please turn to Philippians chapter 2 and verse 19. We're carrying on in this series in the book of Philippians. We like to look at various parts of the Bible, various themes of the Bible. We often like to just work through a book in a series and just let the Bible breathe, let the Bible speak for itself. And so we're well into the book of Philippians now. And before I read this passage together, let me just back up slightly and let you know what's happened. This is Paul the Apostle writing to his friends in Philippi, in a church in the city of Philippi, to Christian people, to just normal people like you and me. It was a different time, it was a different context, but similar struggles they faced, similar fears they faced, and similar solutions were and are to be found in the resources of God. Same for us, same for them. He has told them of his love for them, his deep gut-felt affection for them, that he prays for them often, that he prays they might grow in the love of God. These are the things we've looked at already. We saw Paul's obsession with Jesus, and actually this kind of toss-up between going and being with Jesus and dying and staying and being useful and helpful for the Philippians. He wasn't really sure. It was like a 2-horse race and it was a photo finish. He wasn't really sure, but he would prefer to go and be with Jesus. Not that he was suicidal, he just saw death as more of Jesus. And then we saw in Philippians 2 the famous passage about Jesus a couple of weeks ago, and Jesus' humiliation on our behalf to then be glorified by his Father. And then we saw the kind of therefore that came after that. What do we do in the light of Jesus' humiliation and glorification? And we looked at the fact that we're to work out all that he's done for us, to work out our salvation that he gave us, that he's saved us, to work it out, to then also know him at work in us. It's not like we just get on with it, he's done all the hard work and we're just left to our own devices. No, he's at work in us as we work it out. It's beautiful. And then this morning, Paul gives us a caring kind of side note on the back of all of that, which tells us a few things, as we'll see. It tells us a little bit about his view of illness, tells us about his view of his friends, of what it is to be a mature believer, and it reveals a kind of level of friendship that I feel we can aim for. So let's read Philippians 2, verse 19 to 30, and the words will appear on the screen. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So then, welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honour people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. Understandably, most of us would not say that Philippians chapter 2 verse 19 to 30 is our favourite passage of the Bible. Most of you will not have Philippians chapter 2 verse 22 on your fridge door. Most of you will not have heard somebody say, I doubt anybody's ever heard somebody say, that's my favourite verse, the one about Epaphroditus. It's not. On face value, it's not the most riveting. It's not Philippians chapter 2 earlier on about Jesus dying for us. That's the stuff we love to rave about. They're the passages we love to think about. Ephesians chapter 1 for me is one of my favourite chapters of the Bible. Not Philippians 2 verses 19 to 30. It's still God's breathed out word. It's still, even when we read out the genealogies in the beginning of Matthew and Leviticus, son of, son of, son of, son of, even when we read out those bits, we still believe it's God's breathed out word, and there's much for us to gain from these passages, and it's the same here. And so this morning, I want us, with the title Honourable Service, to look at three things that stand out once you get beneath it looks like a friendly side note about a couple of his friends, but once you get beneath the surface, you see that he's talking about one or two things that are really helpful for us. He seems to suggest that everyone is selfish apart from Timothy, so we'll get to that. That there's a kind of family feel rather than a professional business feel about this, and that we're to honour those who sacrifice like Epaphroditus. And so, first of all, this verse 21, Paul says, amongst a lot of positive things, he says this quite negative, he gives us this negative phrase where he says, everybody looks out for themselves. Everyone's a bit selfish. It's a bit harsh, Paul. Timothy's this selfless guy, unlike most others, it would seem. It stands out as a bit of a negative. Paul's not saying literally everybody. It's a kind of generalisation, a little bit of hyperbole. He's exaggerating for the point of making a point. If he meant literally everybody, he'd be contradicting himself in the next few verses when he talks about somebody else who is worth following, who isn't selfish, Epaphroditus. So he can't literally mean everyone. We have seen him talk earlier on in Philippians, even as we've gone through it, we've seen how he's talked about people who actually are Christians. So it's not like he's just talking about the world and those that don't know God are selfish and everybody that does know God isn't selfish. It's not like he's even making that statement, because earlier on in Philippians he says that there were people who were preaching the gospel out of selfish ambition to make life harder for himself. And I'm pretty sure that they were Christian people who were preaching the gospel. They were then suddenly somehow managing to preach the gospel and make life harder for Paul by distancing themselves from him, and he was in prison and they didn't want to be caught up with him, and so they deliberately somehow made it harder for him. Phenomenal, really. Paul's got them in mind, I'm sure. When he's stuck in prison in Rome, which is where we think he was when he wrote this, he's stuck in prison, and people like Timothy and Epaphroditus are there with him. They're risking. We'll get on to what they've risked in a moment. But they're risking things by being with him. And he says, look, when there's a backdrop, not everybody, but when there's a backdrop of selfishness, take note of people like Timothy who are selfless. They are modelling themselves on Jesus. You know, it's very much flowing from this humiliation passage, glorification passage that we read in the beginning of chapter 2. Out of all that Jesus is his example, Paul says, you have the mind of Jesus who gave himself. He's then saying Timothy is like that. Timothy is of that mould. Obviously Timothy's not perfect. Obviously Epaphroditus isn't perfect. But these are people worth emulating. These are people worth looking up to. And they're going to be people we honour. Paul says about Timothy that when he prefers others in verse 20, when he looks out for the interests of others, it's equated with, in verse 21, the implication is he's looking out for the interests of Jesus Christ. Do you notice that? As a Christian, when you and I look out for somebody else, as a Christian, otherwise it's just a nice work, but as a Christian, when we look out for somebody else, I think there's a promise in here. It says you're actually doing that on behalf of Jesus, and we know that elsewhere. Jesus said, didn't he talk about the fact that when people served him, when people looked out for him, well, we didn't do that. We were looking out for other people. Yeah, Jesus says that's the same thing. When you served the least of these, you served me. And I think we see that here. When Timothy is interested in other people's welfare, he's interested in the welfare or the cause of Jesus Christ. It's not just a nice thing to serve other people. It's not just the right thing. It actually means you're serving Jesus. Paul puts Timothy on a pedestal, rightly so. And Timothy is one of these guys who's very happy to be second, to take the back seat, not the back seat, to be in the background working hard. Not a backseat driver. He's very happy to be in the background. See, Timothy was gifted, a gifted leader. He could have been off doing all kinds of wonderful things for God, and he was there, stuck in a prison, looking after Paul, because Paul couldn't go anywhere else. He was in prison. So Timothy was just going to serve him where he was, like a son to a father. That's the kind of person Timothy was. Now, for a moment, just think about people you know who are like Timothy. Just think, even around the room right now, people that are very keen to serve, very keen to look out for the interests of others. I could begin to list some of you. It just would take quite a while. But there are, if you look around the room, there are people who are not kind of martyrs for the sake of it, not reclusive or anything, but happy to be in the background and just muck in, just serve on behalf of others. We have them. We have many of them. We have many Timothys here. I'm saying this morning, would you think about who would be on your list, and do you think you might appear on somebody else's? Not because it's about what everybody else thinks of me, but for a moment, does anyone else think of me as a Timothy, I wonder? Does anyone else think, oh, he does muck in, he does just serve, he's interested. When he's talking to me, he's not looking over my shoulder, interested in something else, he's not cutting across my conversation to get his agenda in. She's genuinely looking at me in the eye and wanting to hear how I'm doing. That was Timothy, genuinely concerned for the welfare of others. Not only interested in his own agenda. Actually, we see something of Paul's selflessness as well in all of this. I don't know if you've even noticed it. He's stuck in prison. Two of his key guys that have been a real blessing to him, he's trying to send them back. It's not because he's fed up with them and he's bored of their conversation. On the contrary, he's speaking of how valuable they are. But do you notice, for the sake of the Philippians, he's trying his hardest to release both of them back. I love that about Paul. So he's saying Timothy's worth following, but Paul's worth following his own example. Timothys aren't just nice people. They probably are. But they're, as well as nice, they are, like I've already said, they are genuinely wanting to know how you are, focused on you. Sometimes Timothys need helping out of the fact that they will almost wear themselves out for the sake of others. And we've got to look after Timothys that are like that. But that's not to excuse the rest of us to be selfish. Oh, we've got some Timothys, so I don't need to be one. No, that's what I was saying a minute ago. Who's on your list, and do you think you'd appear on anybody else's? Is there anybody you could ask and say, do you know, would you say I've got any kind of Timothy about me? Do I serve others, or am I selfish? What's it? You know, somebody maybe you could ask honestly. Maybe choose carefully. But I don't want us just to say, oh, this is nice. Oh, isn't Timothy lovely? Oh, we've got some lovely people like Timothy in our church, and then leave it. We're all to be jolted. Even those of us that would be called Timothys by others, we're all to be challenged and addressed at this moment by this passage and by God who breathed it into being. This is what I'm saying. This passage can be ignored as a nice side note. Actually, I feel God's got some things for us. And it isn't just this passage that talks about service to others. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Peter tried to rebuke him for it. And Jesus said, no, this is how it works. If you want to be, and at other times he said this a lot, you want to be first, be last. You want the limelight? You want glory? Serve others. So that's the first thing this morning. Timothy's example and a challenge that it is to us. Secondly, not only does Paul, we move on to look at this theme of family, not only does Paul describe his friendship to Timothy as a father to a son, which obviously is a family feel, not only that, just notice for a moment the amount of concern that is flying around. I mean, it's almost ridiculous. Everybody's concerned about everybody else. It's almost like that hypothetical football match between two Christian teams. You know, where the goalie on one Christian team throws the ball out to the striker of the opposing team and says, after you. And the striker says, no, after you. No one ever touches the ball in that hypothetical Christian football match. It never happens. But hypothetically, that's how I imagine it being sometimes, if we were to really live this out. Obviously, football is supposed to be fun, and that wouldn't be very much fun. The ball just sat there, everyone looking at it. No, after you. It's a bit like that here, though. Everybody seems to be concerned or worried about everybody else. It's not very businesslike. Paul's saying, I want to send Epaphroditus back to you because he's worried about you worrying about him because he was ill. I'm worried about Epaphroditus, who's worried about you, who's worried about, and you were worried about him. It's like, come on, let's get on with it. It's not exactly The Apprentice, is it, if you're all worried about each other? Come on, we want a bit of cut and thrust. Let's be more professional. Let's go for it. We've got kingdom to advance. We've got souls to save. Come on. What's all this family? Who's worried about who? Stop being concerned about everybody else. Get on with it. But then it turns out we aren't actually a business after all. We aren't a corporate entity. I mean, we have our legal standing as a charity, but that's not what I'm talking about. We are not essentially a business. Cut and thrust leadership is not appropriate here. Cold-hearted, shallow affection is not to be the norm here. Deep concern, real relationships, father and son, mother and daughter style relationships, sisterly, brotherly relationships is to be the norm. And in our setting, that is even more of a challenge than it is in other settings. What do I mean by that? Well, we came from a church that we planted in Macclesfield, which is a small town of about 60,000 people. And in a town of 60,000 people, after a few years, you can't really go anywhere without bumping into somebody you know, first of all. But in a town like that, a church, which is about 100 people, even in a church of about 100, everybody knows everybody. And if a new person comes through the door on a Sunday morning, everyone knows that they're new. You've got to be careful you don't all rush at them. But there is an easier to attain sense of family in that setting, in a little town that's all cosy and nice, and everyone feels like they live around the corner from everyone. It's still a challenge to be friendly and real family and actually have depth of relationship, even in a little cosy town. But it's even more of a challenge in a city centre where the population of the whole is 3 million, and we're all coming in from all parts of that 3 million. It's a very, very different feel. It can feel a bit like a commuter church, where, you know what I mean by that? Everyone comes in, everyone does church, have a good time together, hopefully. We'll maybe chat with one another a little bit, and we commute back out to where we live. Some of you live in the city centre, and so you haven't got so far to go. But there is a real mix of where we're all coming from. And so we've got work to do to make this that we see with Paul, which I don't think is negotiable. I don't think it's up for grabs. I think it's supposed to be the norm. I think you're supposed to find this kind of friendship. Now, you're not going to have father-son friendship with everybody. Paul only had it probably with Timothy and one or two others. So it's not like we're saying everybody has to be absolutely in everybody else's pocket. No. But this is where, in whatever setting, whatever church, small group life is massively important. Even if it isn't exactly, you're not exactly able to get to one of our community groups, but you create something else that just fits around your world because you can't get to that particular meeting or whatever it is that you're in. What I'm saying is the principle is what counts. We have to find ways of building deep, real friendships so that we are not this cold-hearted, shallow, commuter, city centre church, which is what our circumstances will pull us towards if we don't do something about it. Does that make sense? We need small groups, we need each other. We need to do things like church lunches, which we're aiming to do more and more of. And it isn't just something that I can fix if it's ever a problem for you. It's something we all have a responsibility in. I can't be everybody's father or son. I can't be everybody's best mate. And you can't. There's just too many of us. All I can do is talk about it now and at other times to create environments where we can do something about it. And then we all have a responsibility to see that this is supposed to be the norm, not lonely God TV Christians who never ever see anyone, never have a depth of relationship, never can open up, never can feel the warmth and the support. And we had a couple of weeks ago, Dave brilliantly kind of went there with a whole small groups setup that we have. It's a setup, it's an organised setup, not so that we can be nicely organised, so that actually this stuff can really happen. And you can say to somebody on a Wednesday night when your group meets or whenever they meet, I am really struggling at the moment. Please would you stand with me? Please would you pray with me? I'm in prison at the moment. And I need Timothy and Epaphroditus with me. I mean, this is a letter. It doesn't get much colder than a letter. Black and white, ink on a papyrus on paper. But it doesn't get colder than that. And the distance of the geography involved meant that they weren't with him, but the warmth that we see between Paul and the Philippians, and then the warmth between